Okay, um, now we're going to go continue our trek back through Revelation, and we're going to go to Revelation 20, where this 1,000-year reign is set up. And we're just going to read through this. There's something that's very curious that happens in Revelation 20. We're going to get into it and demonstrate some things that um, typically I think are missed when people do a study of Revelation, and we'll hopefully point that out. We'll take a quick look at this Daniel passage, but I think the rest of these passages down here, they fit just as well with the study of the millennial time frame, and we'll probably squeeze in um, those passages either down here or in one of the upcoming videos. So let's hang on and go to Revelation 20. Okay, here we're in Revelation 20. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding in his hand the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain. And he seized the dragon, that ancient serpent who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and threw him into the pit. And he shut it, and put a seal over it, so that he might not deceive the nations any longer until the 1,000 years were ended. After that, he must be released a little while. Then I saw thrones, and seated on them were those to whom the authority to judge was committed. Also I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for the testimony of Jesus and for the word of God, and those who had not worshipped the beast and its image, and not received the mark on their foreheads or their hands. They came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is the one who shares in the first resurrection. Over such, the second death has no power, but they will be priests of God and of Christ, and they will reign with him 1,000 years. And when the 1,000 years are ended, Satan will be released from his prison, and he will come out to deceive the nations that are at the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them for battle. Their number is like the sand of the sea. And they marched up over the broad plain of the earth, and surrounded the camp of the saints and the beloved city. But fire came down from heaven and consumed them, and the devil who had deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet were, and they were tormented day and night forever and ever. Then I saw a great white throne, and him who was seated on it. From his presence earth and the sky fled away, and no place was found for him. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books were opened. Then another book was opened, which was the book of life, and the dead were judged by what was written in the books, according to what they had done. And the sea gave up the dead who were in it, and death and Hades gave up the dead who were in them, and they were judged, each one of them, according to what they had done. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. And if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. So, um, what we have here is the devil being bound right on the heels of Armageddon and the return of Christ. So one of the first things that's going to happen here, starting in Revelation 20, is bound. And now here's something that's repeated over and over and over again. Satan is bound for 1,000 years, and he can deceive the nations until the 1,000 years were ended. And it says it again. And actually it says it a few more times down here, 1,000 years, 1,000 years. A lot of people, a lot of denominations don't teach about this 1,000-year reign. Their belief system is amillennial, and that really just isn't biblical. The 1,000 years is repeated so many times here, but those other denominations believe that the world is slowly improving to the point where Christ will come and reign at the second coming forever. And as we saw, really, you've got 7 years, a harsh judgment, most of the world is wiped out. And then you see this messianic kingdom being set up, and it's specifically 1,000 years. And 1,000 gets repeated over and over and over again. So we're just going to let that go at that point. Okay. And then blessed and holy is the one who shares in the first resurrection. Over such a second has no power. So um, right after here, we see the people that had not taken the mark and resisted. So this is the tribulation saints, and we saw that in the last video. They came to life, so there was a resurrection here, and they reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. So that's a resurrection from the dead. And then blessed and holy is those who share in the first resurrection. And so people get a little confused by this definition of the first resurrection, but in prior videos we talked about Jesus when he was raised from the dead after his crucifixion. That was the first resurrection, and he was the first fruits to go into heaven. And so they're using the model here of the harvest, and the first resurrection, according to Jewish custom, is the barley harvest, and the first fruits of that harvest is the very first time the barley is ripe. It gets brought into the temple as a thanksgiving to God. That would have been Christ at his resurrection. And now the latter resurrection is the wheat harvest, and the believers coming into the kingdom. And what we're seeing here is the end of this resurrection program of believers occurs right here. Okay, so that's part of the first resurrection. And then over such, the second death has no power. So there's a second event that happens, and it's called the second death, and we'll see that in a bit. And then here we see this, again, reference to 1,000 years. But now Satan's going to be released after 1,000 years, come out and deceive the nations and gather them together for another battle. And then boom, God's going to throw that battle down, stop it, and then finally put Satan in the permanent abode, which is called the lake of fire. And why would Satan be allowed to sort of be chained up and held for 1,000 years and then let out? And Bible scholars talk about the fact that, well, the people that came into the millennial reign, they were all believers that came in, and we'll see in a few minutes that their life, their age expands greatly. Just like coming out of the Garden of Eden, we saw hundreds of year lifespan. That's going to be restored again in this program. So imagine how many kids will be produced over this 1,000 years with people that don't die in more idyllic conditions that we're going to see in the next video. So what we got is a whole bunch of people that still have the sin nature. That hasn't been corrected yet. And what we see at the end of the 1,000 years here is Satan has a big pool of people, and he does convince a whole bunch of them to rebel, even though God is on the throne, Jesus is on the throne, the conditions are perfect, judgment is righteous. They still find a huge mass of people that rebel, and that's because of the sin nature. Okay, something else that's important here is verse 7 says, when the 1,000 years have ended, and it describes what's going to happen to Satan. And then after what happened to Satan, so we're at the end of the 1,000 years, and now it says, I saw this great white throne, and we're going to come back to this in a couple of videos from now. So we've cast ourselves all the way forward, and we're talking about what the final judgment of the non-believers is going to be in here. And you can see that basically all the non-believers, whether it's Old Testament times, church age, or through the 7-year tribulation, all the people that didn't believe are going to be resurrected into permanent bodies. And unfortunately here, what's the end effect is all those that came up out of hell that are resurrected, all the other people, they're going to be judged by the works that they did and thrown into the lake of fire. So, and they're judged according to their works because they don't have the righteousness and the forgiveness of sin imputed by Christ. The only thing they can be judged by is their own, quote, good works or their own deeds, which that's going to be judged, and it's never going to be enough. So they're going into the lake of fire, and anybody thinks that there's not eternal punishment just hasn't studied these passages. And I promised we'd take a quick look at Daniel too. This is just an Old Testament confirmation of what we just read through. And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to other people. It shall break into pieces all these kingdoms and break them to an end, and it shall stand forever. And so the reference of the other kings and kingdoms were the kingdoms that came before the unrighteous rule of men that lasted right up until the final satanic / antichrist one world system that we saw in the prior passages. Those are all going to be destroyed and put to the end, and then God's going to rule and reign forever afterwards. Now, I promised one little bit of a controversial thing, and I want to point it out here, and then we'll pick it up in the next video. What happens here is we get this description of what's going to happen with the believers, the unbelievers, and the judgment here, and then it casts forward and looks at what the final judgment's going to look like after the 1,000 years are over. The thing that I missed, and I've gone through this a lot and then had to be corrected by Jack Kelly, if you go to gracethroughfaith.com, he's a wonderful Bible teacher. He corrected me. I sent him an email because I couldn't understand what's going to go on here in Revelation 21 and 22. And he corrected me and said between the verse 6 here and verse 7, we basically have a transition from the current setting up of the millennial reign to then the view at the end of the millennial reign when Satan's finally defeated and the white throne judgment occurs. But when you get to Revelation 21, it picks right up again just before here at verse 6. It's picking up right at the start of the millennium. So that's really important because we'll see some things in Revelation 21 and 22 that just don't fit if what you think happens is that at the end of this millennial reign, if you think Revelation 21 and 22 picks up at that point, you'll get all sorts of confusion. So let's just leave that at that, and we'll take a look at Revelation 21 and 22.